All right, so welcome to the last lecture of this course. We're going to be looking at the future of biodiversity. Up to now, we have reviewed how life got to be where it is, and we analyze patterns on body size, patterns in richness, abundance, and body size. And we also analyze how the species interact, those three attributes interact at the local scale to create the functioning of ecosystems. Today I want us to see what is in the future, for biodiversity. And I want to contextualize the whole thing starting from the beginning. And again, the first thing that I want us to do is to put into perspective what we had at stake here. Again, as I established earlier, there could be easily 100 billion planets like ours, Earth-like planets. However, only about 10 of them are likely to meet the characteristics of our planet, meaning that the probability of us finding another planet like ours are 1 in 1 billion. That statistic for me is just staggering, just for you to realize the significance of the planet and the uniqueness of the planet that we are lucky to live in. This is some photographs from the Voyager 1, and here you can see the different planets, photographs from the different planets, including our planet Earth. And you can see that in reality, if you were to see from outer space, we are so insignificant, like a tiny, minuscule grain of sand in the size of the universe. We are just not like much, yet we are so different. We established in this class that there are several characteristics that are super important for there to be life, all of them met in this planet. The chances of these characteristics in combination happening on a given place are almost non-existent that we know of. We also established that once those characteristics became available in our planet Earth, all what it took was for that beginning to happen, the protocell or the eukaryote, for you to have a huge diversity of species that managed to get to what we see today in the order of 8.7, 8.9 million species. And those species, once they originate, they got to be everywhere. They colonize not only the land, but they also colonize the oceans. They got to have all kinds of sizes, from individuals that we can barely see with a microscope to individuals that are huge. They also got to be huge variations in their abundances, from species that are counted by the millions to species that are counted with the fingers of a hand. Unfortunately, at the end of that beautiful process of evolution of life in our planet, we came about. If you look at who we are in the context of all of the species that we share the planet with, we are just like nothing, 1 out of 8.9 million species, yet we had such a significant footprint on the life of this planet already. We established that we as a species, we probably migrated from Africa a couple times, and again, it didn't take very long by comparison to life in this planet to be found everywhere on the planet. Unfortunately, as we increase our distribution and abundance locally, we also start increasing our impact on the planet. Species that were once super abundant, like this one here, there are records of this passenger pigeon to be so abundant so that you could look at the sky and they will block the sky from the ground. That's how abundant the species were. There are comments of people suggesting back in the day that it would be impossible for them to drive this species to extinction. As people were shooting to these birds to kill them for eating them or for using their feathers, the people that were shooting them were making the claim that it will be impossible to drive those species extinct. What is the irony that in just 100 years that species was driven to extinction? The only place where you see that species today is in museums. There are thousands of species that I can talk to you about that had gone extinct because of our abuse of nature, And we had established as well the reasons for why this is happening. And in a moment, I'm going to explain to you some of the drivers of things that we do that are influencing the way that life is now evolving in our planet. Again, it's causing one of the major factors affecting biodiversity on life, which is extinction. Just like this, over 20,000 species go extinct every year, 20,000 of them. We also found that the abundances of many of these species are declining, and we show in the chapter on abundance that this decline is happening at all levels, from terrestrial species, from marine species to freshwater species. We also show that the body sizes of the species are shrinking. This is a paper by William Chung showing how when you look at different taxonomic groups and whether they are declining or increasing as a response of climate change, what you find is that most of the species are actually declining in body size. In the chapter in body size, we showed that one of the worrisome signs of a species shrinking their body size is that that's what happened normally in the past to species that had gone extinct. Unfortunately, these impacts that we're having in nature are beyond the impacts on the species that we impact directly. That's what is called trophic cascades. Basically what happens, sorry, I made a spelling mistake here, it's trophic with H and Y. Basically what happens here is that we start affecting certain taxonomic groups, like for instance here in this case top predators, and you can see the density of these top predators declining for many species. This is data on different species of sharks over time, and you can see on all of the species there is an increasing decline. Now, given that this species of sharks feed on a given a prey, no surprise then the prey is actually increasing their abundances. You can see the manta ray densities here, all of them increases their density. Now, everything that the manta ray feed on, then no surprise because the populations are increasing, then the density of the prey will decline. And this is what is called trophic cascades. Again, are consequences to entire ecosystems by us impacting a few species. That's what is called a trophic cascade. Basically, given this trophic relationship between a species, when we impact one species, chances are that we might impact other species indirectly as well via what is called a trophic cascade. Unfortunately, these impacts that we see in nature will be forever. I don't know where in hell we're coming with the idea that many of these impacts are going to be reduced or that we're going to fix nature once we start getting worried about nature. Turns out that we also have the science to suggest that many of these impacts might be irreversible. This is thanks to what is called alternative equilibrium states. The idea here is that populations of species are adapted to local ecosystems, to local conditions. Once you stress that population, the species will try to adapt, and basically adaptation means that there are some genes that are not suitable to survive on those conditions, meaning that all of those genes will disappear. The genes that are left are suitable, and those are the ones that will make the population moving forward. But what it means is that all of those genes that were driven to extinction, they are not coming back, baby. They are gone for good now. So what it means is that if we remove the stressor, this population is not gonna go back to what it was before, because those genes, again, as the process of adaptation was playing out, make all of those genes went extinct. Now, what is even more worrisome is that once we start driving these populations to very low levels, the populations will drive themselves to extinction in what is called an extinction vortex, and there are different processes that lead to those extinction vortexes. One is called depessation, and basically what happens in depessation is also called the Ali effect. What happens here is that when you have individuals that are few, they are so far apart that they don't find each other. Good examples of this, for instance, are sharks. The populations of sharks have been reduced to so few numbers that the sharks are so far apart in the oceans that they cannot find each other. If they don't find each other, then they don't reproduce, and then they have less input to the populations, and the populations will decline by themselves. This is again a consequence of us stressing the populations at the top. Another example, for instance, are coral reefs. Coral reefs, the actual individuals, they are dying off on the coral reefs, and the few that are left are so far apart on the reefs that when they produce the offsprings cannot find themselves in the water and they cannot fertilize. There is also genetic losses. With these genetic loss, another cause of this extinction vortex is the fact that when you have fewer individuals left, the individuals that are left reproduce with each other, and most likely what they are close relatives. So basically you ended up having in the populations that are made out of fathers and sisters reproducing with brothers, and that creates an inbreeding depression that aggravates the decline of the populations. With the loss of genetic diversity as well, you obviously reduce the chances that the species might be able to resist other environmental factors down the road. And again, that's what is called an extinction vortex, that is caused when we take these populations way too low in their abundances, and they fail many times to recover from this. Unfortunately, this is something that is happening at at the level of many species, and there are multiple studies already showing that we are at the verge of a mass extinction event. Given the current rates of extinctions that we observe among species, it's easily that in the next 100 years we can cross the threshold of what has in the past caused mass extinction events, moments in the history of the planet when over 70 to 75% of the species in the planet went extinct. In those cases, back in the day, most likely it was volcanoes and plate tectonics and a meteorite. Now it's us, again, a massive force of extinction in the planet. We also established that why are we doing this? We already know the mathematics on that very well. We know that the major drivers of those species going extinct are things like overexploitation. Overexploitation is basically when we exploit populations beyond the natural levels of replenishment. This is like you having money in the bank and taking more money out of the bank than the money that you put in. Basically what happens over time is that you will go bankrupt. So this is exactly what is happening to many of these populations. We are killing a lot more individuals out of the populations than the individuals that can be reproduced in that population. Another factor that is driving a lot of species down, shrinking their body sizes and leading them to extinction is habitat loss. Habitat loss is defined, generally speaking, as the reduction of hospitable locations for an individual of a species to survive. So normally we think about habitat loss like us going and cutting the forest, and it's something that is super obvious, but habitat loss also has multiple forms to impact biodiversity. Like for instance, you can imagine things like pollution, that makes habitats completely unusable for a species. When you come and build roads, those habitats become, again, something that a species cannot use. So habitat loss is a broader definition than us just going and cutting down trees. It's us making habitats unable to support a species. We also have the big boy these days, which is climate change. And basically what we have found is that with these increases in temperature, there are multiple changes that are happening on a species. The species are becoming smaller, they are producing fewer offspring, their abundances are declining as well. That's not to say that we're not paying attention. Obviously, a lot of people around the world is very concerned on this thing. And what we have observed is that when you look at the stressors, things that we are doing, like what I just described, overexploitation, habitat loss, climate change, all of those stressors are increasing over time. Obviously, what is happening simultaneously is that there are a lot of initiatives, what is referred here as mitigation policies, that are also increasing. Obviously, people around the world is concerned about this thing. Many of us are concerned, and as a result, several governments are putting regulations to stop these stressors. Yet, when you look at what's happening to biodiversity, biodiversity is declining. This is a paper that was published by Bouchard. Basically, the point that this paper is making is that despite the fact that we can quantify the stressors, despite the fact that we are making things to reduce those stressors, it seems that they are still very insignificant to cope with the environmental crisis that we have in our hands, because you see biodiversity going down despite the fact that there are these efforts going up. So what is in the future? This is an analysis that I published, that I introduced early on, and it's this idea that basically, if you look at the number of people over time and multiply that by the amount of area that is required by every individual, and divide that by the amount of land that is available, you ended up calculating the number of planets that are required to sustain humanity. And what we showed back in the day is that the number of people already surpass the number of people that can be sustained well by the planet. The reason why we had more people than the planet can sustain explains why do you have a lot of people going hungry, or why a lot of species are going extinct. This status of overshot could lead to potentially us being on an ecological death on the order of 27, 25 planet Earth by 2050. Unfortunately, the evidence suggests that we might not care. This is mind-blowing to me. Even the science suggests to you that despite the fact that we are so concerned and we're doing so many things, the reality is that over time we are going to care even less and less and less for this. This is what is normally referred as environmental generational amnesia, or shifting baseline. The idea is this: imagine time here on this axis, and this is biodiversity, how beautiful it looks. It turns out that if biodiversity is declining, there is a generation at a given point, or elderly people that saw biodiversity at the peak, and they had the reference point of how biodiversity was used to look like. By the time that they die, they can look back and they realize, wow, biodiversity is declining. The reason being that they had this reference point when they were children. Now, then we come along, and now our reference point is much lower. So we don't see the change. Unfortunately, the change can only be appreciated when we see it, and the only ones that saw that change, that reference point, were the elderly that die off. So over time, what happens is that our generation start having lower and lower references points of how the biodiversity was look like, and given the fact that we don't see the change, then the chances that we are going to care are even less and less and less. So unfortunately, I had to finish my class. I want you to picture all of this. We are taking a beautiful thing that is life in the planet, that has diversified, that provide important goods and services to humanity, that we are destroying at a rate in which those resources cannot supply people, cannot supply the resources needed by everybody, and at a time we don't seem to care. So the only conclusion that I can finish with this class is to say that we are screwed. You want to see how screwed we are? I want you to take my following class, where we talk about what we are doing to preserve biodiversity. At the end of that class, though, there is I might finish up on that class with a sense of hope that there might be still a potential path for us to fix this at this moment. Unfortunately, at this moment, the evidence suggests that we are pretty much screwed. And with that, thank you very much for joining my class.